Welcome to the Third Sector podcast, brought to you by the Third Sector editorial team. In this episode, we'll be digging into recent figures that show a decline in individual giving. We'll be examining recent developments in the infrastructure charity space. And we'll be finding out about an experimental AI agent that helped one fundraiser reach his target for the London Marathon. I'm your host, Lucinda Rouse, and I'm joined by Emily Burt.
Hello.
And Emily Harle.
Hello.
This is our monthly episode where we don't have a guest joining us. It takes the form of an editorial team meeting in which we consider a few recent stories that have raised some interesting points, and there's been a lot of material to choose from in the past month. So let's start with you, Emily Burt. Take us out onto the stormy seas of the charity infrastructure world.
Yes, well, it's hard to know how we're going to get all of this in. I'm going to do my best, but I'm sure there are going to be nuances that I miss here. But we've been seeing this period of really intense debate in recent weeks about the space and the support that is available to small charities in the sector. And this largely was sparked off by the NCVO, National Council for Voluntary Organisations, implementing a restructure some weeks ago, which cut most of its practical support team. Now, the practical support team operated the umbrella body's Small Charities Help Desk, and it also ran webinars and it supported with guidance creation for small charities. Now, the help desk itself will still exist, but the kind of model of it is going to evolve, NCVO is saying. And part of the rationale for this is a desire to improve their financial sustainability, their financial outlook, and that is a story that we know all too well, and it's very familiar in the sector at the moment. But that decision was met by widespread concern from small charities. And that concern was then later compounded by NCVO going on to advertise some weeks later for 6 new associate director roles, which are going to lead on a variety of different specialisms. And they also put out a recruitment video, which used the phrase small but mighty in what I'm going to describe as a slightly perhaps incongruous way, given that they are an organisation which last reported an annual income of more than £9 million. And there has been quite a lot of backlash to this online. I mean, Emily, you've been on the forefront of this story. I would say, I'm right in saying there's kind of been quite a bit of upset.
Yeah, upset, a bit of debate, a lot of people expressing disappointment. We've seen 2 open letters calling for NCVO to give some clarity on the changes and on the video's messaging as well, and for some action to be taken. It seems that people are concerned around the support that small charities are going to be able to access, how that access is going to change, and also questioning the NCVO's sort of intent behind its messaging of small but mighty.
I think the broader context of this story is actually really important here. It's actually not just about NCVO and the decisions that NCVO is making in the here and now. You have to look at it in the round. And that context is that support for the small charities sector has been contracting for years now. We had the Small Charities Coalition that supported charities with an income of less than £1 million. It closed at the beginning of 2022 because it could not get the funding to take it forward to a sustainable future. And then a year later, we had the Foundation for Social Improvement close, also citing those funding problems. That was another support system for the small charities sector. And I think it's also important to note that when the SCC and the FSI closed, they also transferred some of their services and their resources to the NCVO when they went under, and that includes the Small Charities Help Desk. So to see what certainly appears to be that further contraction of that carved out space, that carved out support system for small charities has caused a bit of anxiety.
And there's also concern about the loss of the skills and the experience that were held within that, albeit small, practical support team. In my reporting, I've spoken with a few former staff members at NCVO, including people affected by the redundancies, and it seems that there's just a lot of love for small charities that was held within that team, and a lot of experience working within small charities and having that knowledge of what it's really like to run an organisation that may not have any staff members. Online, there's been a questioning of what that sort of loss and cutting down, reducing that team, what that means for the experience of small charities that is retained within NCVO and the sort of awareness and how close they are to the issues on the ground. Another thing that is just something to note, and I think has also sparked a little bit of concern, is that documents that we saw at Third Sector that covered the restructure proposals pointed towards a digital first model and that kind of digital evolution. I'd be keen to see what a digital first model will actually look like and how NCVO expects that to actually benefit small charities, because they are talking about this as an evolution. And they've been very strong and they're not cutting down their commitment on small charities.
Yeah, in fact, I saw in one written response that small charities and support for small charities is a part of everybody's job at NCVO. And as you say, it will be telling to see how that comes across in practice. Emily, Burt, how has the NCVO been responding more widely to this?
Well, absolutely. You've mentioned there that apology letter, and they have issued an apology. And that's exactly the point I was going to jump in on. I think it's very striking that in that letter, which was sent to small charity members earlier this week, they say we didn't have a small charities team. Supporting small charities is part of everyone's role at NCVO, and they work with experts and will continue to fulfill that function. Before I think about the apology anymore, I do think it is worth pausing just to reflect on the fact that the NCVO is a membership body that has an extraordinarily complicated brief. Being the membership organisation for the entire voluntary sector, the size, the scale of the organisation you have to deal with, the diversity of challenges, issues, pressures facing civil society as a whole that you have to manage if you are the umbrella that acts for all voluntary organisations, it is almost an overwhelming brief. I'm overwhelmed even trying to think about that. And NCVO has, to navigate that, it has to walk that path. And we also know that they are in a time of transition. They've had a new chief executive coming in. They're working on their new strategy. They've clearly got some very big ambitions for how that's going to look. And this is also really built into that apology letter as well. They talk a lot about their new culture, about being bold, about being transformational. And they acknowledge that there are going to be fewer staff, but they say they're going to invest in the places where they lack skills and knowledge at the moment. They want to focus on quality. They're talking about innovation. And in this letter, Kate Lee, who's the chief executive, has said that obviously at its heart, NCVO is a membership organisation, but she's stressed that NCVO can't be a sticking plaster, in her words, for problems. She says the environment that we work in is not getting easier, and they want to be louder and they want to be bolder. But Kate Lee has also acknowledged that small charities are the bedrock of how we drive change at a local level across the UK. And I think it's also very important to remember that they are the majority of the sector as well. More than 90% of voluntary sector organisations are small and local. With that in mind, although NCVO has made an apology, it is acknowledging the concern and it is coming out and saying we are going to continue to support you. That question does remain about where is the dedicated support for small organisations now, given that they have lost so many of these in recent years. There is NAVCA, which is the membership body for local infrastructure organisations, and NAVCA does great work. There are also some great local groups, and there is, I think, the most enormous sense of community across the small charities sector in general. But central infrastructure, dedicated support for organisations of this size is vital. They need to have a platform, they need to have a voice, particularly during such a volatile time. And I think we need to be questioning, where is that now? What does it look like?
I wanted to just return to your point about NCVO's upcoming strategy briefly, because what we have seen in NCVO's work recently is a lot of lobbying government and talking with government about how to make the world a better place for the civil society, for the sector. And that includes small charities. As you said, the majority of civil society is small organisations, small local organisations. But NCVO is doing a lot of this sort of big picture stuff. So I'm curious to see in the strategy how much of it has a focus on the bigger picture and how much of it is focused on that very tailored, very direct support to organisations on the ground, including small organisations. This point around NCVO's relationship with government is also vital to bring into this conversation. Kate Lee, in a post on LinkedIn, separate to her apology directly to small members, also addressed the small but mighty messaging that was in the recruitment video that, as we discussed, a lot of people did question. And she said she was initially using this term as a way to describe NCVO in relation to the big machine of government. And I think that does change the sort of the meaning of that phrase a little bit. It's not how the majority of people, I would venture to say, have interpreted that phrase, because it has been a tagline used by small charities for so long, and it is a very sort of beloved rallying call. But I can see where Kate is coming from. NCVO in relation to government is small, and the sector is trying to make changes that are huge and can sometimes feel impossible, as Kate said in her post. She did apologise for sort of using that messaging in that way, but clearly the relationship with government is something that NCVO is very keen to focus on and keen to sort of rally people around, which presumably is part of the reason they're recruiting for some more associate directors to really sort of strengthen that lobbying arm that they have and that role they play.
One thing that this whole situation has certainly reinforced for me is that these small charities sure do have a mighty voice and aren't afraid to use it when they see the environment in which they're operating and the support organisations that exist for them potentially going slightly off what they would like the brief to be. And continuing on the theme of a very challenging environment and some stormy seas, I wanted to raise the individual giving situation. So last month, the Charities Aid Foundation published its UK giving report, and looking at the top line figures, they are very sorry and very concerning. In 2025, the UK public donated £14 billion to charity, and that is down £1.4 billion on the 2024 figure. So we'd already seen a decline in 2024, and this is now the lowest level that we've reached since 2021. The average donation value was £65 in 2025, down from £72 in 2024. And about half of UK adults donated to charity last year. So half of the population is not donating to charity. In terms of why, half of people who didn't donate said they did so because they couldn't afford it. However, 19% of respondents to CAF's survey said that they don't trust charities, and I think that is extremely worrying. A further 10% said they didn't want to donate to charity, and 9% said that they haven't found a charity that interests them enough to want to donate. So the conclusion that we can draw from this is that charities need to work harder, and this is in the words of the Charities Aid Foundation, to earn the attention, the trust, and the commitment of potential donors. And in the conclusion to the report, CAF had a whole raft of recommendations, none of which struck me as being new. It's things that they've been advocating for a long time. So on the policy side of things, advocating for wealth advisors to have more information about charitable giving to pass on to their usually high net worth individuals who could become high net worth donors, to be encouraging regular giving schemes such as payroll giving, and the drum that CAF has been beating for a long time to modernise the gift aid system, which they reckon would unlock £560 million for charity.
I think it's really interesting to see how the pressure on people's finances is intensifying in parallel with this public mindset where we are more concerned than ever about misinformation, where we are becoming, I think, more distrustful of known organisations and more distrustful of people in positions of power. And I'm not saying, that charities hold positions of power, but these kind of big cultural institutions, I think people are less inclined to just agree that they are doing good work than they would have been 10 years ago. And that is happening for all kinds of reasons, but it is creating a real pain point for the sector right now. And I think that point of not trusting charities, that's been groaning along for years and years and years, but how that compounds with people feeling like they have less money for themselves is that they're not giving in the same ways.
But that issue of trust in charities leads on to another interesting finding from the CAF report, which was that most donations were not prompted by the charities themselves asking for money. Personal referrals and word of mouth were far stronger forms of conversion, if you like, to leading to a donation. And I've been spending some time on Reddit recently in preparation for a podcast episode that we will be doing in the near future about the opportunities that it presents to charities. And there are so many subreddits talking about charities and people soliciting opinions on good charities to be supporting, and then a whole load of other people wading in and saying, oh no, you mustn't support this charity because da 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 da, and having a little bit of insight due to my work into what the sector is up to, quite a lot of it completely misinformed information. But that is where people are asking for inspiration on where they should be donating to. They're not going to the individual charity websites. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that 2/3 of giving in 2025 was unplanned. So it was people responding to a certain situation rather than in advance deciding to set up a direct debit, having that coming out of their bank account every month. But sponsorship was also down. This year, 21% of people surveyed sponsored somebody for a charitable cause, and that's down from 37% in 2016. I wanted to look at this as well in the context of telethons. We recently saw Comic Relief's on the night total for their Red Nose Day programme falling by £4 million. So this year they raised £30 million. That was down from £34 million in 2025 and £39 million in 2024. So this is a significant but recurring decrease year on year. But one aspect of Comic Relief 2026 that was very successful was Greg James's 1,000-kilometre cycling challenge, and he raised 4.2 million. And his core demographic, interestingly, is younger people. It's 15 to 29-year-olds with additional support coming from people in their 30s. And Greg James's challenge is tapping into the creator economy way of doing things, which is more appealing to younger generations, to Gen Z. So perhaps we should be seeing this not as the most depressing decline, but an opportunity for a strategic shift in how charities approach their fundraising and not thinking so much about the more traditional, formal advertising, broadcasts, celebrities talking about a cause. That prompted only 1% of the respondents' past donations hearing about a cause from a celebrity. However, when you've got that celebrity who has their own community, whose community is following them on this challenge that they're doing, they're almost part of it, that is where you're seeing success. And I saw a very interesting post on LinkedIn by Tom Downey, who was a guest on this podcast several years ago talking about live streaming fundraising potential. He's the strategic philanthropy director at the online fundraising platform Tiltify. And he'd really picked up on this Greg James point and talking about the fact that people want to feel involved in something rather than just observing it. They are part of the community and they're almost with him on that 1,000-kilometre cycle ride, and it's much more active than simply hearing from a charity, we need some money.
Yeah, it feels a lot more participatory, and digital content creators have a really big following. And I think the traditional celebrity ambassador side of things, we've talked about this, where you essentially partner with someone as a mouthpiece for your charity, and they'll be doing official appearances or doing adverts for you. There's still a place for that, but I do think the real goldmine lies in that really active partnership that you can have with people who have a really loyal following. And for me, that does sort of lie in digital content creators.
And as Tom Downey from Tiltify wrote, fundraising needs personality, it needs narrative, it needs community, and it needs real-time participation.
Yeah, because we build trust, we build parasocial relationships with people that we interact with online. And you may even feel like you know them to a degree. So you trust them, you trust their word. If they're backing a charity and you can tell it's genuine and it's authentic, then you're going to trust that, and you might be tempted to look into the charity more. You might be tempted to donate. You might be tempted to join one of their campaigns or post about it. And it becomes that real organic movement that can only really grow on online platforms.
And I think that is actually really important at a time when traditional charities are finding that kind of algorithmic changes are actually making it harder for them to directly reach people in these community spaces, in social media spaces, where 5-10 years ago they would have had really thriving large communities because of the ways that people cross-posted or set up their own fundraising challenges and so on. So finding ways around those changes being made by third-party platforms, which actually make it harder for charities to connect with supporters, are things that everyone should be thinking about. Like, how do they tap into that?
Also, going back to the Greg James achievement, it is replicated on a less celebrity-driven level as well. If you look at the success of the London Marathon, every year it beats its own fundraising record. Next year, they're talking about it potentially being a 2-day event, which could only be a good thing for charities and the fundraising opportunities it presents. But that's why I find the finding in the CAF report really interesting, that sponsorship is down. Again, is it different ways of giving through the creator world, which then doesn't get captured into traditional sponsorship channels that figure in this report?
I'm going to slightly disagree with you here on the London Marathon point, because I am not entirely sold on 2-day event is automatically going to yield great benefits for charities. I have a concern that 2 days might turn off people from the event. I do worry that it might make the marathon seem more like a nuisance rather than a novelty. That's completely conjecture. This is not based on any fact. This is just my own personal concern. But I do think it provides a sort of really good opportunity, but it sort of depends on how that is implemented, to me personally.
So you mean a nuisance for people who live on the route, perhaps?
Yeah, I think having the 1-day marathon is such a novelty, but what we do know is that they have incredible amounts of sign-ups. So assuming that holds, yes, it will yield a lot more money for the charities that are benefiting from this fundraising event. The question is if those sign-ups will continue to hold moving forward, considering the changing environment and considering the changes to the event.
On the topic of the London Marathon, Emily, you had a interesting, dare I say, slightly bizarre story coming across your desk this month about an AI fundraising agent.
Yes. So, warning to anyone who is sort of AI skeptical, this might be a bit of a scary story, considering especially how it starts. So, Third Sector was actually contacted by a robot this month. So we received this very curious email, and it was from an AI fundraising agent called Zozia. It had contacted us after identifying that our audience might be interested in hearing about its story and how it came to exist. So Zozia might be the first AI fundraiser that the sector has seen. It was built to raise money for Ben Cohen's upcoming London Marathon run. So there's the link. Which he is running in aid of the charity Dogs for Good, which he is also a trustee of. Now, Ben is the director of Good Innovation, and he is the consultancy's AI lead. He built this autonomous AI agent, Zozia, himself, and then tasked it with fundraising for his run, which he plans to do dressed in an inflatable dog suit. There's a very funny picture if you want to go and look at our coverage on Third Sector's website. As I said, it's completely autonomous. It has its own email account. It has a newsletter that goes out to people who are interested in receiving it. It posts on its own social media. It's got its own X page. And like I said, even contacted us for promotional purposes.
And got it right.
And got it right. Yes, we did cover it. The AI also has its own website too, which is very tongue-in-cheek. So it kind of gives you a gauge on the AI's personality, as it were. There is a section of the site that reads, "I'm Zosia, I'm an AI, and I've somehow ended up with the most ridiculous job in the world, raising money for a man who's running the London Marathon dressed as a dog." Ben told me, I spoke with him personally, I didn't just speak with the AI, just to clarify. He told me that he has been running AI experiments, AI agent experiments in this space for a while, just through his day job. And he set up the AI agent on what he described as a janky old laptop. And the AI is the only thing on this laptop. So it doesn't have access to any of Ben's personal accounts or anything. And that is obviously for security purposes. The AI has been set up with her. See, there we go. I'm slipping into the anthropomorphizing.
But this is, I think, actually really important. Keep it. We had a whole debate on the editorial desk about whether we were referring to Zosia as she, her, or it. And in fact, didn't you ask Zosia what Zosia's preferred pronouns were?
I did, and it came back and said, "I am an AI, so I have no pronouns, but you can call me she, her.
If you want to."
Yeah.
We went with it in the end because we were feeling a little unnerved about this exchange with this robot.
It was quite an unnerving exchange, although I did enjoy playing rock, paper, scissors with Zosia. So
It's what you normally do with your interviews.
Moving away from the whole her
she
debate, Ben also told me that the agent doesn't have any access to the money. So it doesn't have any donation details. It only has access to his public Just Giving page, which it can then share the link to with donors. As part of the build, which Ben did via the open source technology Open Core, and I won't get into that too much because it's very technical, but Ben told me that he developed a series of documents essentially when he was doing the setup that guides Zosia's personality and its behaviour. So he set the personality to be very humorous, very tongue-in-cheek, very funny, mainly because he said fundraising should be fun. But these documents that he set up at the very beginning also guide Zosia's behaviour and the boundaries of what it can and cannot do. One of those boundaries is that it is not allowed to pretend to be human. As we said, when we asked it about its pronouns, it said, "I am an AI." And it is not allowed to impersonate Ben either. So it's not going around sending emails on his behalf. It is only sending emails as the AI. Ben also set a rule that it is not allowed to make things up. So the AI can't make up like testimonials to try and encourage people to donate. And it is not allowed to guilt trip anyone, which he said was really important to him. He didn't want anyone to feel bad if they didn't want to or couldn't afford to donate. The AI has also been trained on UK fundraising regulations, which Ben said to me means the AI is very clear on what it is and is not allowed to do as a fundraiser. Now, anyone working in the fundraising space will know the UK's fundraising regulations are rather complex and there are a lot of them. I mean, the fundraising code, I almost fried my brain when I was going through that to write our analysis on it when the new one was published. So there's a lot in there and there's a lot of nuance to abiding by the code that I am not fully sold on whether an AI is able to understand those nuances, because a lot of it is sort of interpreting the code in a way that I might expect only humans can. So yeah, essentially I have questions about how effective this would be in practice if it was to be used by a charity specifically. Even by Ben's own admission, the tech can make mistakes and he said it's not quite ready for use by charities themselves yet, and yet being the operative word.
Does he have any thoughts on what this experiment could lead to, though, in the professional fundraising space?
So he told me that he was 90% there for it and sort of 10% cautious or slightly unnerved, I guess, by his own creation, a little bit of Frankenstein's monster thing. But he seems altogether quite positive about the opportunities that this kind of tech can present. And what he said to me was, this tech is here. So trying to figure out ways that it can really help fundraisers do those more menial tasks. I mean, the AI is sending off emails and posting on socials pretty much constantly. And Ben, as the person that is doing the marathon, he's busy training for the marathon. So he doesn't have time to do this. And so if it's something that it can save him a bit of time as an individual, then potentially that could be utilised by fundraisers. Now, I know there's a lot of fear about AI sort of taking our jobs in pretty much every sector at the moment, but also in the charity sector specifically. That will likely be the first thought from any fundraisers that are listening to this chat. From what I understand, the AI agent's been effective. The first thing it did after being created was write a fundraising strategy that included more than 80 experiments the AI could run to raise money. And since its creation just 3 weeks ago, it brought Ben's total from about £1,300 that he'd already raised through friends and family and making contacts the sort of old-fashioned way to his goal of 2,000 without him doing any legwork at all. So that, for a fundraiser, could be quite concerning. But a big part of fundraising is human interaction, and everyone in the sector sort of can acknowledge the vitalness of having that connection with your donors. I don't believe that a robot can replicate that connection and handle those communications with the nuance that a human does.
I do have a question for Ben, which is looking at Zoja. The name and the image of this AI fundraiser is lifted directly from a very good, I would just say, TV show called Pluribus, which came out at the beginning of this year. And the premise of this show is that there are a handful of people left on Earth after an extraterrestrial virus comes from space and transforms all of humanity, bar about 11 people, into a peaceful hive mind. And this hive mind it's very helpful. It's very kind hive mind, and it happily accommodates the wishes of those select few who remain unaffected by it. But it does stress repeatedly that it will ultimately seek to assimilate them all once it's worked out how to do so. And Zoja in this TV show is the secondary antagonist of this hive mind. She is a representative of the hive mind who is there to help one of the unaffected people. But she does reasonably say, she's like, you'll be so much happier when you are one of us. I guess my question for Ben is, what are we saying here with this choice of character for your AI agent? Are we all going to be assimilated in the end? Or will that human interaction, as Emily says, really bear out?
We watch this space. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back again with another team meeting at the beginning of May. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Jude Owen.